But if you stick with this, the benefits are profound. You will most likely gain performance. You'll be able to recover more quickly. You'll be able to work out at the same level with a lower heart rate. So you'll be able to push it even more. And they've done this with cyclists, with rowers, with ultra marathoners, with so many other people. And there's not a lot of confusion about that. It's making that switch, though. People don't want to make the switch.
Welcome to the Spartan Up podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Race.
We are talking about overcoming obstacles. The same way we teach people to get over obstacles on the course, we will teach you here on the Spartan Up podcast to get over obstacles in your mind.
Today on the Spartan Up podcast, James Nestor, author of the hugely popular book, Breath. He's done deep research into how breathing can affect your performance. He tells Joe Sena about the history, the science, and some simple steps you can take to improve your breathing. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Trueform Runner. Conquer your next race with a complete training solution from Spartan and Trueform. The Spartan Trueform trainer will redefine your running, improve your form, and reduce injury. Save 10% with the code SPARTAN10 at trueformrunner.com/Spartan. That's trueformrunner.com/Spartan.
Joe Sena here with Spartan Up podcast. I got the dog, Sir Ernest Shackleton. We've got an amazing guest, James Nestor, and he's going to teach me and this little crazy dog how to breathe. That's right, how to breathe. I mean, we should all know how to breathe because without breathing, we're dead. So what do we have to learn about breathing?
It turns out a whole bunch. I was asking myself that question early on in my research years and years ago. I thought that this was a really stupid idea for a book until I started talking to the researchers in the field and the experts and feeling the stuff for myself, and found that you can eat right, you can exercise. If you're not breathing right, you will never, ever, ever be healthy.
You know, in 1972, Mom walks into a health food store. She meets a yogi and she changes our diet from cannolis and pizza, raviolis to we become vegan, and she starts breathing. I don't know if this is commonplace in your studies, but Om, right? The meditating and the Om. And I remember hearing that as a kid, and, you know, it was weird growing up in an Italian household with that, but she was pushing this breathing thing in the 70s, and we all thought she was nuts, but it turns out, I think you're right. I mean, look, the ancient Spartans apparently believed it too. They used to run 10 miles with water in their mouth.
Yeah, people have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And to us, it seems pretty wacky. But then you just look at all of the chronic modern maladies taking over the entire population. And so many of those maladies and diseases are related to the ways in which we breathe, specifically how poorly we're breathing.
So how can we fix it? What can we do? We're all probably a little lazy when it comes to this breathing thing, right?
There's quick fixes, and then there's more elaborate fixes in which you can train yourself to actually make healthy breathing a habit. And that's really what this is all about. It's not to sit around and put timers on your phone and stop yourself and have to think about breathing all the time. It's about working out your respiratory system, figuring things out in your brain so that this will just run in the background. So the first thing we can do is breathe through our noses all the time. I don't care if you're jogging. I don't care if you're sleeping. I don't care if you're resting. You have to breathe through your nose. That's just the reality. You need to breathe slowly, a lot slower than you think you should be breathing. You will be getting more oxygen that way, and breathe less. And I know that seems counterintuitive. Like, how would be breathing less be bringing me more O2? And that's how it works. And we've known this for 110 years. And yet so few people realize it. You look out on the streets right now, people jogging, working out, they're, got to get more O2 in there. They're doing the opposite by over-breathing like that.
How does the nose get you more oxygen, number one? And then the second part of that is, like you said, 75% of the world has like a deviated septum. It feels like you're getting less. So why the nose? And then what do you do if you're like me and you just don't feel like you're getting enough oxygen through the nose?
So I'm going to invite a guest on right now. Here he is over here. His name changes sometimes. So if you look at this guy, and for people listening who can't see this, I'm holding up an anatomical model, like a deli slicer view of a human head. If you look at what's happening in the nose, when you take air through the nose, you're forcing it through this gauntlet of different structures where it is heated, it is moistened, it is filtered, it is pressurized, so that by the time it enters the throat and down into the lungs, it is conditioned so your lungs will be able to extract oxygen so much more efficiently. 20% more oxygen, that's what you get breathing through the nose than equivalent breaths through the mouth. If you consider the mouth, I know you can see this now, Joe, there's nothing. It goes straight through. So when you're breathing through the mouth, you can think of your lungs like an external organ because they are exposed to, if you live in a city like I do, they're exposed to pollution, they're exposed to allergens, they're exposed to viruses, they're exposed to everything. This is our first line of defense, our nose. And you need to be breathing through the nose, both in through the nose and out through the nose.
And in the case where you have a deviated septum, you go get it fixed, or it doesn't matter?
So early on in my research, I went down to Stanford, which is pretty close to me here. I'm in San Francisco, and they took a CAT scan, and the doctor started cracking up because he's like, "You were so completely messed up. I've broken my nose about 3 or 4 times. My septum is so shifted to one side." He was surprised that I didn't have more problems than I already did. He explained it to me that 3/4 of the population have a septum that is clearly deviated to the naked eye. So this is not something special if you have a deviated septum. This is something that's actually considered normal at this time. So some people absolutely need surgical interventions, okay, to be very clear about that. But most of us, what we need to do is we need to start breathing through our nose more often because our nose, it's not just bones, it's covered in tissue, in erectile tissue. And this erectile tissue can be worked out just like any other muscle in our body. The more it flexes, the more it opens, the easier you are going to be able to breathe. And so that's really the key. It's a use it or lose it organ. And so few of us, 25 to 50% of the population now, habitually mouth breathes. So the less we use it, the more this closes up.
I'm trying to breathe only through my nose during this entire podcast. Just so we're clear.
Maybe we'll just sit here in silence and we can do some sign language and figure it out that way.
And breathe through the nose. Okay, I'm running, hypothetically. I'm breathing through my nose because, it was badass for the Spartans to do it. Maybe that was a discipline thing. I don't know if they really understood the organ like you're describing it. Maybe they did. But I don't feel like I'm getting enough air. Do I open my mouth or do you just fight it and slow down?
So if we have been habitually mouth breathing for decades, which I was certainly in that camp, switching to the nose is a complete pain in the ass. Okay, it takes a long time, which is why so many people try to do it for a day or two and they say, screw this, I can't do this, and they go back to mouth breathing. But the science is very clear, and people have been doing studies on this for decades and decades, that if you're able to get over that hump, sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it even takes months. And you will lose endurance, you will lose performance when you first switch. No one wants to see themselves drop off, right? But if you stick with this, the benefits are profound. You will most likely gain performance. You'll be able to recover more quickly. You'll be able to work out at the same level with a lower heart rate. So you'll be able to push it even more. And they've done this with cyclists, with rowers, with ultra marathoners, with so many other people. And there's not a lot of confusion about that. It's making that switch, though. People don't want to make the switch. They don't want to see their performance drop off. So it just takes time. There's no easy way of doing it. There's no real hack. You just got to struggle through it. And one thing so many breathing therapists told me is that you should never work out harder than you can breathe correctly. So if you notice your breathing is going to hell, slow it down, build your base, and work up from there.
I like that. I make the boys wrestle, my two boys, and I'm going to go to practice tonight. And you've got me absolutely convinced that everybody is going to get a mouthful of water during the first 15-minute warm-up. And then we're going to have a bucket they have to spit it in at the end. And we're going to start this as a practice.
This is what they were doing at Yale 50 years ago as well. Sometimes they would have runners put marbles in their mouths and run around and then have to spit it back out because they knew maybe they didn't have CAT scans, they didn't have capnometers, they didn't have pulse oximeters, but they were doing this for a reason. because they knew the advantages of nasal breathing. And again, if you look at the science, there's not a lot of controversy about it. It's just a pain in the butt to switch.
I think rather than you saying it's a pain in the butt, you should start saying it's a pain in the nose.
I will do that henceforth. Thank you for that.
Hey, why breathe less? I don't know if you covered that. You said breathe less.
Many of us are breathing too much. And when we're breathing above our metabolic needs, we are using up energy that we could use elsewhere. Imagine a car, imagine being at a stop sign and just be revving. You're neutral, you're just revving the engine. That's cool if you want to waste gas, but it's going to break down the car so much more quickly if you're constantly doing that. What you want to be doing with your breathing is running efficiently, and that means breathing in line with your metabolic needs. And for the vast majority of us, that means breathing less than we are actually breathing right now, and that we even think is okay. And so the question, you mentioned this at the beginning, is you feel like you're not getting enough oxygen, right? So you got to switch to your mouth, you got to breathe more. That need to breathe is not dictated by oxygen. It's dictated by rising levels of carbon dioxide. So right now, if you were to exhale and hold your breath, you feel that need to breathe, there's nothing to do with oxygen. That's CO2 rising. So if you slow down your breathing and allow that CO2 to rise, which is a very good thing, oxygen can disassociate or detach from hemoglobin much more easily. So by having this balance of oxygen and CO2, healthy levels of CO2, healthy levels of oxygen, you're going to be operating so much more efficiently. And again, we've known this for decades and decades and decades, but you still see people working out, breathing way too much.
A guy had sent me in the last few weeks, I haven't seen it yet, a mouth guard that has a one-way valve or some type of valve on it. And he said that the studies show wearing that, breathing through it, you could take 10 minutes off your marathon. Do you know anything about this?
Oh yeah, that's inspiratory muscle training. There's also expiratory muscle training. Most of them have you breathe in through your nose, which is good, more oxygen, and then breathe out through this. What this does is it slows down the air coming out and it pressurizes it, which allows more air to be extracted. We only use a quarter of the oxygen that we take into our bodies. So because and if you're breathing even more quickly than that, you're off-gassing so much more of that. So you're just bringing stuff in to put it back out. It's a complete waste. By slowing those breaths, you can extract more oxygen. You can run more efficiently, which means you can breathe less, get more oxygen, and also have a lower heart rate, which for endurance is exactly what you want. That's how you're going to maintain and keep energy for especially, real endurance sports, things that take a while. Marathons take 2, 3, 4 hours.
When you're implementing these changes with athletes, are you seeing better performance?
You're seeing EPO levels rise. You're seeing more red blood cells. They have equaled it to, it's very similar to altitude training, but you can do it anywhere. You get more nitric oxide, and you're able to pull more energy from lactate, from anaerobic states. But what it's really doing is building your aerobic base so you can stay in that aerobic zone, which is also exactly what you want. You want to be burning oxygen. You don't want to be burning just sugar. That is a very inefficient way of getting fuel. So again, for decades and decades, they've been doing these studies. And what's interesting is it doesn't only have advantages for athletes, but it has advantages for people with heart problems. It helps you lose more fat more quickly because that increase of CO2 means an increase of oxygen to those areas. This stuff is the biochemistry is super confusing. It took me months to get my head around it, but anyone who studies this knows it. This isn't some new theory I've come up with. This is stuff that came from Yale 100 years ago.
It's funny you said Yale because 100 years ago, sorry, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here. I went to go see Dr. Colin Campbell at Cornell University, and he wrote the book, A China Study, and about eating more plant-based. And he said when he was doing his research, he found literally a book on the shelf at Yale from 100 where they had done studies on meat eating versus plant-based. and they found that plant-based outperformed meat eaters. Like wasn't even close, but still no one bought into it, and the book ended up on a shelf collecting dust. Same thing here, I guess.
This is what I kept finding for 4 or 5 years. And I was not looking for these stories, but it got so incredibly frustrating to find the same story playing out over and over and over again. People would discover something, it would have massive benefits. As soon as that person died or left the institution, it was forgotten. People moved on to something else. 20 years later, someone would discover the same thing, name it something different, find the exact same benefits. It would, so look at nutrition, right? So we've known, people were writing about this 120 years ago, that processed food was complete garbage. It was ruining our teeth. It was ruining our health. What happened with that information for the past 80 years? I mean, you should have seen the crap I was eating, growing up in the 80s, Velveeta and Twinkies and all that. And we thought that that was fine. You'd be hard pressed to find someone now that would say processed food is good for you, right? But it took 100 years for us to get our heads around it. And I don't think that we're going to be going back. I don't think in 10 years, people are going to be like, oh, I don't want to go to the farmer's market. I'm going to go to Safeway, get some Cheetos and bean dip. I just don't think that's going to happen. So breathing is in the exact same camp, but we've known about the benefits for breathing for thousands and thousands of years. We've known scientifically all of the benefits for more than 100 years. And still, when was the last time your doctor asked you about how you were breathing, during your checkup? It doesn't happen. That's starting to change right now.
Yeah, I guess, I had a neuroscientist on a podcast, and he said, the number one thing that motivates us is the avoidance of discomfort. And so I guess not eating the Twinkie, not breathing through your nose, right? We just keep taking the easy route. And so that's why the books probably end up on the shelf at Yale, or hopefully there's some books written at Cornell. We got the China study. I went to Cornell. So hopefully there's a few books there. But did we used to breathe through our nose?
We will be right back to this episode, but first we're going to talk about our sponsor, Trueform. And Johnny, do you remember last year at World Championships when those 4 intrepid athletes decided to lock themselves in a shipping container for 24 hours on one of these?
Yeah, not just lock themselves in a shipping container, lock themselves in a shipping container and see who could run the furthest on a treadmill. Sounds completely nuts.
We love
Spartan,
it.
We're completely nuts. Fortunately, there's also a company out there that's equally committed to doing the work, and it's Trueform treadmills.
Way to go, Trueform.
Yeah, no, honestly.
Yeah, it's a beautiful marriage.
Incredible partnership. So what we did, we locked these 4 guys in
Whenever
a
tribe
dark,
manages.
silent space. They ran on a Trueform treadmill, and the cool thing about this, they did the work. So a normal treadmill, it starts to spin. You just try and keep up with it. It does all the work for you, and if you run badly, you just run badly faster. Trueform, you have to make it move. You do the work. It makes you do the work properly. That's the other thing. It makes you run better. People think that practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
True.
Imperfect practice makes injury. So Trueform has put together a program that's going to solve all that for you.
Yep.
You go to trueformrunner.com. They have a program. For a monthly payment, you're going to get the machine.
You get workout of the day.
Training program. You're even going to get a gait analysis that shows you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong.
And then you even get entry at the gate to a Spartan race.
Yeah, they're
Awesome.
throwing a free Spartan race in. And you know what? If you want to run faster, you want to run better, you want to run Spartan races, you really need to do this. Trueformrunner.com.
All right, let's run back to this episode, Johnny.
Good call, Sephra.
The number one thing that motivates us is the avoidance of discomfort. And so I guess not eating the Twinkie, not breathing through your nose, right? We just keep taking the easy route. And so that's why the books probably end up on the shelf at Yale, or hopefully there's some books written at Cornell. We got the China study. I went to Cornell. So hopefully there's a few books there. But did we used to breathe through our nose? Did we find that in the research? Like 1,000, 2,000, did everybody breathe through their nose?
Well, speaking of Cornell, I'm sure you've read Deep Nutrition. So an amazing book that talks about all this stuff, and she's from Cornell. So there you go. So as far as nasal breathing, you can't go back in time and look at how people are breathing, but what you can do is look at skulls. And this was an area of research I had no idea I was going to be waiting around in. When you start a book about breathing, you didn't know you're going to be looking at 100 different skulls. But what we can tell from the skulls is all of our ancestors, all of them, had these huge jaws, these prognathic faces, huge sinus cavities, huge nasal apertures, larger airways, okay? Larger mouth means you have larger room to breathe, so a larger airway. And so there was a very good chance these people were breathing through their noses more than us, because what happens when a mouth shrinks, which you look around society, all of our mouths are too small. That's why we have teeth extracted and braces, is the upper palate can push into the sinus cavities, which can make it harder to breathe through the nose. So our ancestors did not have this problem. If you don't believe me, you can just look up any ancient human skull. What you're going to see is that powerful jaw. You're also going to see straight teeth. So our ancestors didn't need dentists, didn't need Invisalign. They all had naturally straight teeth. Wisdom teeth grew in just fine, not impacted. We're the only version of Homo sapiens that have had chronically crooked teeth and all the breathing problems and airway issues that come with that.
So funny you say that, because I've had lots of dogs over the years and they don't need braces.
Pugs do. If you look at highly interbred dogs like pugs or bulldogs, watch them sleeping. They're we are the human equivalent of these dogs, because those dogs have been built, brachycephalic dogs, to have these very flat faces. You think that that's an evolutionary advantage to have a face like, I mean, those things can't run a block before just the constant respiratory problems. Humans, modern humans, are the exact same thing.
Are people listening? You wrote the book. Are people waking up? I wanted to do the podcast. I'm excited because Mom was pushing this stuff in the 70s, but everybody else?
Certainly seems that way. I've gotten dozens and dozens of emails from doctors, dentists. I just spoke at Stanford Medical School. I'm speaking at Tufts. And that's just a way. So just to be clear, I'm a journalist. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a doctor. I was lucky enough to go into the field and talk to the top experts at top institutions all over the world. So what I'm bringing out is everything that's already been researched, right? I wasn't in doing these studies. I wasn't digging up ancient skulls, but this book here was been out for 10 years. You see, I have just a few notes on it. And he talks about this exact same thing. Daniel Lieberman, he's at Harvard. So much of this research, though, is in these academic journals, academic books that are pretty hard to read, and so it hasn't made it to the general public. And my job is to try to translate that into something my mom can read and understand, or my nephew can read and understand.
How the hell does a journalist get interested in how to breathe? How'd you stumble upon this concept?
Yeah, it was never something I set out to do. In elementary school, I was writing about what I wanted to be in life. It was not a journalist writing about breath, but so many things kept happening over the years. I think that it really came to a fore when I went to a breathing class here in San Francisco. There's a dime a dozen of these things. They're all over the place. Had a very weird experience that a doctor couldn't really explain. It was a physical experience. It wasn't like, I saw God or had a spiritual experience. I breathed in this rhythm for about 10 minutes and just started pouring sweat. My t-shirt soaking in sweat, head totally soaking in sweat. I was like, wow, all that from just breathing in this rhythm. And a few years later, I didn't know what to do with that experience, because I'm not going to write a memoir about, breath. But a few years later, I met freedivers. I said, oh my God, okay, if these people can use breathing, to harness breathing, to hold their breath far longer than any scientist thought possible. Everyone thinks that you hold your breath longer than 2 minutes, you're getting brain damage. These people are holding their breath for 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, and there's people have been free diving for at least 10,000 years. So I saw the potential of breathing in free divers. And then I started learning about Wim Hof being shot up with an endotoxin, breathing in a certain way, not suffering any of the symptoms associated with that endotoxin E. coli. And I thought that there's a much deeper, weirder story in here. And so I spent several years digging up the stories and talking to the people in the field.
Well, it's interesting you say that, right? Because one, I think Lance Armstrong probably didn't need the EPO if he knew how to breathe right. But two, I'm just thinking, I used to clean swimming pools as a kid, and there are certain systems, pump and filter systems you could put in place that don't require chlorine if you've got enough oxygen in the water. It cleans the water naturally, right? Like lightning, when lightning strikes, it creates oxygen in the air and it kills a bunch of that smell. So I would guess what you're saying is if I get enough oxygen in the right balance in my body, it's going to kill the stuff that should die. Right?
I think that's basic biochemistry. Same thing with nitric oxide. You produce a profusion of nitric oxide in your nose. And we know one of the many things nitric oxide does is it interacts directly with viruses, with COVID. We know that. So I don't think it's a coincidence why cancer starts and progresses in areas of very low oxygen. And we know that. So by having this imbalance in your body, by not having things constantly move around, things are going to fester. It's just like a body of water, right? Moving water, not a lot of stuff can grow, not a lot of gunk can grow in that. The body is the same thing. That includes our breath. We want our breath to constantly be cycling into our lungs and out. We don't want to be having breath locked in the dead space of our lungs. We don't want fluids to be static in our bodies. Everything needs to be moving.
I'm a big believer. I tell everybody that, because I used to clean swimming pools, the human body is very much like a swimming pool. We got to move blood around. That's why I'm a big believer in the burpee. But you've now added, I should have been doing the nose breathing since my mom's. I'm all in. But I'm finding myself during this podcast, I'm breathing through my nose. I'm getting a little anxious, like almost.
That's an increase of carbon dioxide. So if you look at, they've done studies with asthmatics, with people with anxiety. These people have a very low threshold for CO2 because they associate an increase of CO2 with not being able to breathe. You hold your breath, your CO2 goes up. They associate that with an attack. So they've conditioned themselves to breathe like this, so that their CO2 remains very low, so that they don't have that feeling like they're suffocating by having an attack. But there's been decades of studies showing that by increasing their CO2 threshold, by having them breathe slower, by having them calmly hold their breath at times, they can overcome so many of the symptoms associated with panic and with asthma. So at the beginning, that increase of CO2, you're going to feel stifled, claustrophobic. You're not getting enough O2. What I would suggest people do is spend $15, get one of these things, a pulse oximeter, and work out on a bike. This is something I did for weeks. And I could not find a level of breathing. I was breathing 6 times a minute while cycling as hard as I possibly could. My oxygen never went down. So 6 times a minute, which is about, a quarter or a fifth of what I should have been breathing. But my CO2 was off the hook, which is why I felt like I was dying. So it's an interesting thing, and people can experiment with it with cheap technologies and see for themselves.
And I love this, by the way. This is unbelievable that we met. You've literally changed my life again. What do we notice about the religious rituals? Are they tied to breathing? The Om that we mentioned before, the Buddhists, or
about 20 years ago, some Italian researchers started looking at the Ave Maria, Catholic prayer cycle of the Rosary in Latin, and they noticed it took about 5 to 6 seconds to recite a verse, and then there was about a 5 to 6 second break as the priest recited the verse, because it's call and response. Then they looked at a Buddhist prayer, Om Mani Padme Hum, which has been around for thousands of years, the most famous Buddhist prayer, had the same respiratory rate, about 5 to 6 seconds to recite that, 5 to 6 second break to inhale. So they gathered a bunch of subjects, they put sensors all over their bodies and watched what happened to their bodies and brains just when they recited this, just when they breathed this way. And they found that oxygen to the brain increased. They found heart rate decreased, blood pressure decreased. And most amazingly, all of these systems of the body entered a stage of coherence. Coherence is where everything's working at peak efficiency. You can see this on the readouts. This study is freely available to anyone, where right now we're talking, I'm breathing a little through my mouth. So all of my wave signals would be all over the map. But when you stop and breathe this way, you can pray or not, but just by breathing this way, all of those waves, blood pressure waves, heart rate, become these heart rate variability, become these very smooth lines. Your body really likes this, just like any machine wants to work in a state of coherence. And so they looked at other prayers. Satanama is a Kundalini chant. They looked at your favorite, your mom's favorite, Om. It still adhered to that same 5 to 6 breaths per minute, which works out to about 5 to 6 second inhale, 5 to 6 second exhale. So you can pray if you want, you can Om all you want, you can do Buddhist chants, you can do the Ave Maria, all cool, but you don't need to get these benefits. You can just breathe at this rate. If you've got a heart rate variability monitor, check out what happens when you go from just talking to focusing on your breath at these slow breaths. And it is not subtle. It happens immediately, and your heart rate variability just goes through the roof, which is exactly what you want.
How does a Spartan get started? We've got like 7 million Spartans in our ecosystem around the world. What should they duct tape their mouth shut for a week? Like what should we do?
So breathe through your nose. We got that one clear. At night, a lot of people can get this during the day. And even when you're jogging, breathe through your nose. Yeah, your performance is going to go down a bit. It's okay. We're in a pandemic. No one's competing in anything for a little while. Let your performance go down, because the benefits, check out the work by Dr. John Douillard or Phil Maffetone. So the benefits of this are pronounced and known. So start with that. But at night, it's tough, right? We're unconscious. Our mouths tend to crane open. So what I've found is a great little hack, and I learned this at Stanford, so it's legit stuff, is you get a little piece of micropore tape, not duct tape, people. Don't use duct, you're gonna mess up your face, your lips, all that. This has a very light adhesive on it, and you put a little piece of tape over your lips at night, so that for that third of the day, you're breathing through your nose. And again, there's profound benefits of breathing through the nose, especially at night. It can decrease snoring, it can decrease sleep apnea, and so much more.
Now, I would suggest for the Spartans, we use like barbed wire duct tape just to make it a little tougher.
You can make it more badass. You can get into bonded stuff like rubber balls and leather strap. Like, I don't care what you do, but breathe through your nose at night. And you will notice so many people, I've gotten like hundreds of emails of people who had mild or moderate sleep apnea, mild or moderate snoring. These are not obese people, right? These are fit people who, because they have a mouth that's too small for a face, for all the reasons we just mentioned, they are snoring. They have resistance in their airway. They no longer are suffering from these problems. And again, I heard about this from Stanford. Dr. Mark Burhenny's been studying this stuff for decades and has shown huge benefits to do it. Plus, it's free. You want to use barbed wire, whatever, that's cool.
Could we get the breathe easy strips on our nose?
Yeah, so some people need training wheels for this, and there's no harm, no foul. Breathe right strips when you're first becoming an obligate nasal breather are awesome. They increase airway, the free flow of air by about 30%, make a huge difference. Also, mute inserts are pretty good. This is an insert you actually put in your nose, and it opens up your nostrils. It's so crazy. We have all these technologies to just make us look like we looked 300 years ago before industrialization, but this is the modern world, people. So those are really good for snoring as well. So any of these little tweaks, to me, this isn't a permanent solution. These are great training wheels. Once you figure it out, maybe wear the Breathe Right strip every other day, and then you're not going to need it because you're going to be adapted to nasal breathing.
What's your next project? What are you going to be researching next?
It's too soon to say. I've got an idea, but the idea of sitting down and writing a book about it makes it look queasy to my stomach. I'm just going to sort of be cooking on the breathing train for a little while and try to get this stuff out to people.
You're awesome. Well, I'm glad we could help, and you helped me tremendously. All my kids are getting duct taped tonight, and it's going to be awesome.
I'm not responsible for that. That's your problem. Thanks a lot for having me.
See you. How can people find you?
MrJamesNestor.com. That's an MR. Some other jerk took James Nestor, so I had to put an MR in front of there. I'm also trying to do this social media thing, which for an old guy is totally confusing, but my Instagram account is I'm trying to get better at that. And I'm only posting breathing stuff. No cute puppies, no delicious looking breakfast. It's just related to breathing and the science of that.
And that's a hard photo to capture, breathing, but you're doing it.
I'm trying. Check it out.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Trueform Runner. Conquer your next race with a complete training solution from Spartan and Trueform. The Spartan Trueform trainer will redefine your running, improve your form, and reduce injury. Save 10% with the code SPARTAN10 at trueformrunner.com/Spartan. That's trueformrunner.com/Spartan.